My name is Bob Darrell, and I am alcoholic. And only through the grace of a God that I was afraid to believe in, that I've accessed and maintained in my life through a process in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, an ability to remain reasonably sponsorable, and a persistent and consistent effort in the primary purpose of helping other drunks. I haven't had a drink or any mind or emotion altering substance since October 31st, 1978. And that's amazing. I am delighted to be here. What I'm going to talk about today is something very dear to me. It's the power in Alcoholics Anonymous has always been through the power of identification. It's not, AA has never been an academic program. It's a program where one alcoholic will risk everything to be genuine enough with another alcoholic, even about their failures and the things they've screwed up, to make a connection until the other person sits there and goes, yep, that's me. That's me. And so this is not going to be an academic approach to sponsorship. It'll be an experiential one. In 1971, as a young kid, I wasn't even old enough to take a legal drink. I was sent to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous because I had literally burnt my life to the ground, and I was just a kid, and I was in so much trouble. It was unbelievable, and I couldn't stop drinking. And from 1971 to 1978, I was in and out of a lot of institutions. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous time and time again. The last several years, I came here and at times had committed myself to abstinence with a sincerity that I could not have been topped by anyone anywhere. I mean, there were times with tears in my eyes. I would be promising myself and promising God and anybody that would listen to me, I'm never going to drink again. This time I really mean it. And, 8-10 months later, I'm back at it again. And I couldn't stop from starting. And I tried a lot of things. I went to some great psychiatrists. I even worked in the field for a little bit. Worked in a couple different mental health organizations, a treatment center. I was very good at it until the day I lost my job for being drunk on the job. My ego thought that knowledge was power. My ego believed that. It believed that if I knew, coupled with the determination and knowledge together, surely I could beat this. I could beat anything like that. And knowledge is not power at all. Matter of fact, if there's a hell on earth, it's when you really know and you can't do it, can you? And was my problem. Lack of power was my dilemma. And, people would come to me and they talk to me about God. And the problem is that didn't work either for some reason. And I didn't know why. I didn't know why on a jail cell, hard jail cell floor on my knees, sobbing, I was begging God never to let me drink again because of the horrid thing I did to end up there. And that it might cost my last and only friend left his life. And I begged God not to let me drink again, and I drank the day I got out. So I'm not just beyond human aid, I seem to be beyond spiritual aid. At least it seemed that way, which it wasn't really the case. I didn't understand I was so full of myself, there was too much of me between me and God. Just as there was too much of me between me and you. And it's hard to fit any grace into a package that's completely consumed with yourself. There's no room for much else when you're fully yourself. And that was the way I was. And something happened to me in 1978 and it was very similar to what had happened to Bill Wilson, except that there were people involved, and Wilson, he was point man. Wilson didn't have a sponsor to tell him, you go do this. Wilson didn't have a home group to encourage him and where he could get in the spiritual conga line and follow the other people and do what they're doing. He didn't have any of that. He's point man. But Wilson had an experience in Towns Hospital, a spiritual experience. God came and did something that would change the planet, would change the human race forever. And Bill Wilson's spiritual experience is often, I don't think it's what most people think. Most people think it's when he has the experience after talking with Ebby, where all of a sudden he felt like he was on a high mountaintop and the clean, cool wind of the mountain air was blowing through him and the light got brighter. And I don't think that was it. And I don't think that was, matter of fact, I think if that's all that would have happened, Bill would have drank again. The reason I believe that is that if you read William James, alcoholics have been having spiritual experiences for thousands of years and drinking again after them. Matter of fact, go to a large gathering of Alcoholics Anonymous sometime with several hundred people and ask for a show of hands. How many people in the room had a born again experience and then drank after it? You'd be surprised how many hands will go up. I think the real intervention, divine intervention, came right after that. Wilson said that after this experience, he was laying there in the hospital, and all of a sudden a thought came to him. Now, in the context of Wilson and where he was at, against this thought coming to him, it was pretty unique. Because here's a guy who hasn't been able to hold a job or earn any money for years, who has not been able to stay sober, and not from a lack of trying. He's been in this hospital several times. His poor wife, who was a debutante, who came from a very prominent family, was working in Macy's as a cashier to support Wilson, and he hadn't helped at all, and he's been a burden to her and an embarrassment to her, and none of that's changed. All he's done is he's been sober a couple days, and he checked in there on the 11th of December, and on the 14th of December, he's laying in this hospital room, and this thought came to him in the midst of this ruined life, in the midst of the ashes that he'd created. The thought came to him that there were thousands, maybe millions of alcoholics out there that could need help. And that a conviction came that if he were to devote himself to that maybe there'd be hope for him. Now, I've been in detoxes many, many times. That is not the kind of thought that would occur to me in a detox. I mean, getting out of here, getting physically better. Am I going to get a job? Where am I going to live? You know, what about me? Am I ever going to feel better? I could give you a list of 100 things, and devoting my life to helping others is not going to be on the list, right? So I think that this was God's intervention. And Wilson got out December 15th, got out of Towns Hospital, and he threw himself with a determination and a persistence that's remarkable. He threw himself into helping others. I've heard two different historians give accounts of how many people Wilson worked with between December 15th, 1934, and May 10th, 1935. Now that is not even, that's barely, that's 4 months. You know, got January, February, March, April. It's 4 months and about 3 weeks. And in 4 months and 3 weeks, the low estimate, and this guy said he thought it was this estimate because he thought he worked with some of those people over and over again, was 77, and the high estimate was 96. 96. I run into people in Alcoholics Anonymous that they work with 2 people and they get drunk and they go, it's not for me. Wow, you got 94 more people before you can make that conclusion, I think. Wilson persisted, and if he hadn't, we wouldn't be here. And then he finally, he started to learn. Well, he didn't know what he was doing. He had no idea, and he didn't have a sponsor, and he didn't have a book. He didn't have a chapter working with others that was full of directions and principles and things to say and things not to say and things to do and things not to do, and even timeline on when to do them and in what order. He didn't have any of that. He just was shooting from the hip, and he made a lot of mistakes. And Silkworth, before he went to Akron, Silkworth said something to him that made a big difference. Silkworth said, you got to back off on the God thing. Why don't you start telling him what I've told you about the phenomenon of craving, about the allergy to alcohol, about the hopeless condition of mind and body. And Lois, he came to Lois right before he talked to Silkworth in despair. You know, in those little over 4 months, there was a guy committed suicide in his house. These are not little minor failures. There were people that stayed there. One of them stole his coffee pot. Another one stole his suit. They smashed furniture in his house. They'd come home. The guy'd be drunk, smashing stuff up. Everything that it talks about in working with others on page 93, I think it is, 97 is experiences Wilson had. When he talks about, it may mean the loss of many nights' sleep, great interference with your pleasures, interruptions to your business. It may mean sharing your money in your home, counseling frantic wives and relatives, innumerable trips to police courts, sanitariums, hospitals, jails, and asylums. Your telephone may jangle at any time of day or night. Your wife may sometimes say she is neglected. A drunk may smash the furniture in your house or burn a mattress. You may have to fight with him if he is violent. Sometimes you'll have to call a doctor and administer sedatives under his direction. Another time you may have to send for the police or an ambulance. And boy, that's a paragraph that makes you go, oh yeah, let's do some 12-step work. I mean, you know, because if you're like me, there's a clamoring inside of you that is stronger than anything. It is the core of our illness. And the clamoring is, yeah, but what about me? What about me? It's going to inconvenience me. It's going to put me out. It's going to be difficult for me. Might even be tedious or embarrassing or uncomfortable for me. When they say that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our trouble, they're not kidding. That goes right. That's the core of my problem and my sickness, is this obsessive over self-concern. And yet Wilson pushed past all of that, and he made with a dedication that was amazing, and it was a work in progress because he didn't know what he was doing. And as time went on, he started to learn. And the same thing happened to me in 1978. My last hospitalization for alcoholism, I fell into the hands of some people that were very, very concerned and big on service and 12-step calls, and they pushed me into this stuff. I mean, there was no compromise here. I remember trying to explain to a guy, because I had a lot of therapy in my background, you know, I tried to say to him, I said, you know, don't you think I should work on me for a while? And he reared back, he said, work on you? You've done quite enough of it. Stop it. And you know something, when he said that, I didn't get mad. I thought, you know, I have done quite enough of it. If I'd have been better by now, I didn't know what else to do, because I had tried every medication. I had tried all the therapists. I'd primal screamed. I was hypnotized. I did rational emotive therapy, transactional analysis. I had some amazing therapists, some of the best because of my parents. And I was still me. You know what that means? Always fighting a low-level depression. Just no matter how good your life is, it's just something ain't right. You know what I mean? It's just a chronic malcontent, low-level restlessness, irritability, just sort of, because I'm a noticer, you know, I notice what's wrong all the time. Notice what's wrong with you. I'll be polite for a while and not tell you And then you'll just need to know after a while, and I'll have to tell you. You know, I can't. It's like Tourette's; it just comes out. I just can't restrain it. And so, consequently, if you're wired like that, sobriety, abstinence is not good. I say I not only have an abnormal reaction to alcohol, I have an abnormal reaction to abstinence. And that's why I always go back to drinking again, because I need relief from abstinence. Because that's the real sickness. And so in 1978, in a desperate move after a failed suicide attempt, I got this guy, and he started telling me to do all this 12-step work, and I started doing it. I started going back into the detox a couple times a week. I hooked up with some guys that were putting together a meeting in the state prison. I eventually started doing that. I went on 12-step calls. On and on and on and on. And to my amazement, I discovered something that Wilson discovered. Wilson discovered that when he would start to sink into the depression, or he would fill up with resentments and fear and anxiety, and he'd just start internally, secretly not doing well. And sometimes he said in his story that this resentment and self-pity would often be in danger of driving him back to drink. And he said he discovered that when he went down to his old hospital in despair, and he'd spend a couple hours with a guy down there, that he'd be miraculously uplifted. And that started happening to me. Now, God, my inspiration to do that didn't come from God. It came from a sponsor and a home group that was all into service. That was their big deal. That was the one in all of Southern Nevada. That was the group that did all the H&I, did all the service, general service, intergroup. They were involved in the conventions. It was the doers group. And so these people pushed me to do some stuff. And contained within the actions, I found the results that Wilson found when he took the actions. That he started to get relief from himself. I didn't understand that what was happening is that the actions were slowly reducing my bondage of self. And so the grace of God starts coming into my life. My life starts getting better because it's not as full of me, and it's not as obsessed with me. And I discovered this was amazing. But I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing everything, everything. You go through here, I hadn't studied this chapter. Everything it says don't do, I'm doing. Everything it says you should do, I'm probably not going to do it. Because if you don't have the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous in your life, and you do 12-step work, like Wilson, like all of us, what are you going to bring to the table except ego? And I had to reverse it. I'm putting personality and ego before the principles, and I had to eventually find the principles and put them first. And that took a while. And one of the things that happened to me that changed me significantly, there was a guy who was sponsored named Andy Henry, and this is probably, I think I started working with him about 1979, and I really got close to Andy. It was one of those kind of relationships you develop where you just kind of click with someone, and you spend hours and hours and hours in Denny's and outside in parking lots, outside of meetings, just talking and talking and talking. And I mean, our lives paralleled so many different ways. I mean, Andy was telling me stuff about him he'd never told anybody. I found myself on a couple occasions telling Andy stuff about me that I hadn't even told my sponsor. It just came out. I mean, we were like this. And one night, Andy called me up, and it was his second phone call to me that day, and he wasn't doing that good. And he said the second phone call, he says, I feel like drinking. And he'd been a chronic relapser. This was, I think at that time he might have been sober about 10 months, maybe 8 to 10 months probably. I don't know what to tell him. See, I've never really worked the steps out of the book yet. I've done some stuff. I did, a BS inventory, the life story. I did that. I made some amends, the ones that people in A were pushing me to make, but I hadn't really. You can't make all your amends if you haven't done all the inventory. I mean, you don't know, because you don't even know who you owe yet. Half the people I ended up making amends to later, I would have thought, oh, really, I didn't owe them amends. They owed me an amends, for God's sakes. And, because I hadn't done the steps out of the book yet, right, to get that shift in perception and consciousness. And so when the book says you can't transmit something you haven't got, Andy calls me up and he's thinking about drinking, and I don't know what to tell him except, well, pray and go to another meeting. Well, he prayed and he went to his third meeting that day, got out of the third meeting, and he couldn't take the emotions anymore. And he went and he got drunk and he came to, and he couldn't face coming back into Alcoholics Anonymous again, raising his hand. And he had a Kawasaki 1100 motorcycle. He went out on the old LA Pike 2-lane, and he got it up to 120 miles an hour and waited for an oncoming tractor trailer truck, and he melted himself. The combined speed was over 200 miles an hour hitting that truck. It vaporized him. And I went to Andy's funeral in a little chapel down in Lancaster, California, where his family lived, and it wasn't too far from there where he hit that truck. And I remember sitting in that chapel, and I knew two things. I knew I couldn't stop trying to help other drunks. I knew that it was the only time. I'd been sober at this point longer than I'd ever been sober since I took my first drink at age 12 years old. And I knew that I needed the relief that I was getting from doing that, and I can't stop doing it. But I knew one thing: I don't want to ever be in another chapel looking at an empty casket with a little bag of body parts because I didn't have what this guy needed. And I better find out what he needed and get into this book and stop being the cowboy and just sponsoring people by ego, and start doing it by principles. I started studying this chapter and working with others, and it's remarkable what I found. And from that moment to this, I have tried to come from a place of spiritual principles in my work with others, rather than come from a place of self-interest or self-grandizement. And it was a lot of it in the early days was about that. I'd get a 12-step call. I got on this. I was on the phone list for central office, and back in those days, at night they had an answering service. Like, they weren't AA people, just a professional answering service that would answer the phones. And they'd get a 12-step call like at 3 a.m. and they had a whole list of people that they could potentially call. But what they did, because they were in a hurry, they were answering phones for a whole bunch of different services, is that they'd discover one or two people that would take the call, and they wouldn't call anybody else. They'd just call those people because they always knew they'd take the call. Well, I got to be one of the people. So I'd get all these 12-step calls at 3, 4, 5 a.m., and they're from people. I don't do the interviewing process on here, right? It tells you about what you have to ascertain a couple things before you do anything with these people. I don't do any of that. I get the call. I can sort of vaguely hear in the background the music, the theme song from Mighty Mouse. Here I come to save the day. I don't really, and I have my cape on, and what these guys are, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. They've run out of vodka and they're lonely. They don't want to get sober. They got telephonitis is what they got. And maybe 6 months later, a year later, they'd have hit a bad bottom and AA would be viable for them. But they're not there yet. And I never tried to find out. I put on my cape, I get in my car. Some of the people, when you say, when you get your address from, where do you live? They reluctantly tell you, say, I'll be right over there. Whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm out the door, next thing I'm banging on, and I'm shoving AA down there. Alcohol's going to kill you. Going to get sober, die. I'm just full of self-righteous, crap. And why? Because isn't it really all about me? It's not for their welfare. It's because I want to be able to go to meetings and show the old timers, these people I've saved. I think I'm earning myself a seat in AA heaven or something by doing this stuff, right? It's very self-serving, self-grandizing, and it's all about me. And nobody's really getting any help. I think back in those days, I think there's probably 2 guys that are still sober. I got one guy lives in Connecticut that's got 34 years. But I didn't really get very effective for quite a few years with people. And it's discouraging because if you don't follow the principles in the book, you're not going to have a lot of success. And if you don't have a lot of success, it's going to be tedious and it's going to wear on you. And what happens to a lot of people is they quit. And they quit, maybe all they would have had to do is just set themselves aside and start following the directions. And page 90 starts the process. And it starts off by setting the stage of what we're doing here. It says this is a proactive process. It says when you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, remember that Bill Wilson never waited for an alcoholic to come to him. He went out to discover people to work with. It's proactive. It's proactive. Matter of fact, Dr. Bob didn't even want help. His son sat in our living room and talked, and his son was who drove him to see Wilson the first time and told us the story how he didn't want to go. He didn't want to go. And Bill Wilson sought out Dr. Bob, not because Dr. Bob was an alcoholic, because Bill was one. So when you discover a prospect, now we're not saying he's ready, we're not saying we don't even know he's an alcoholic. There's a potential here. When you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, find out all you can about him. So this is a listening process. It's you feed him just a little bit about yourself and you listen. It says and this is I think an important thing to ascertain. Does he really want to be sober? Does he have an honest desire not to drink? Or maybe he just wants relief? Maybe he just wants to feel better. Because the book says if he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. It's like, next, go on to the next guy, next. And the reason is, if you try to persuade him, you may spoil a later opportunity. There's an old Persian proverb about trying to change people that aren't ready to change. And it says it's like trying to teach a pig to sing. Not only doesn't it work, it annoys the pig. I annoyed a lot of pigs back in those days because of ego. Because I want to look good. I want these guys to get sober. It's all about me. The book says if there is any indication that he wants to stop, have a good talk with the person most interested in him, usually his wife. And this is beautiful, this next couple lines. It says, get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his background, and the seriousness of his condition and his religious leanings. Now, why would we do all that? Why is information about him? Can't you just throw the program at him? Can't you just tell him what he should do? Well, the reason we do this and we listen to these people and we really listen and we share little bits and pieces of our own story to try encourage them to talk more about themselves is because of the next line. And this is, I think, the benchmark of everything we do in sponsorship, everything you do when you're giving an AA talk, whether you're going to a hospital or institution. It says you will need this information to put yourself in his place to see how you would like to be approached if the tables were turned. For self-centered person like me, this is a tremendous other-centered action. That I am going to push myself aside enough to get in your shoes until I get a sense of you. And when I really get a sense of you, then I would approach you the way maybe you could approach me if I was right where you're at. If I had just burnt my life to the ground, if I was hopeless, if I'd been in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for 10 years. And I think most of us have a God-given ability that a psychiatrist can't have, a minister can't have, and that is the ability to go, if we're clear of ourselves, to go within ourselves to a place where you'll get that new guy in a way nobody's ever got him before. I've had guys I sponsor that 12-step say things later, 6 months later, it said, it was as if somebody had sent Bob a dossier on me. He knew all this, and that's what I got from my sponsor. When he started sharing with me, I'd just be looking at him. Like, how do you know this stuff? How do you know? He's talking about the emotions and thoughts that I had during my suicide attempt as he's telling me about his suicide attempt. And I'm starting to make that much needed connection. I don't think any good comes until we make that with that person. Otherwise, you could just be another authority figure, just another, This connection is vital. And my sponsor, I connect with him. I know that he understands me in a way that, see, I can go to him with anything because I know he's flawed and he's sick like him, because we've had this. We've made these connections. And I know he's very harsh with me at times and very abrupt and very direct. But I always know that he loves me. I've always known that. Even when he's hurting my feelings, it's like, oh, God, gee, Clancy, couldn't you have softened that up a little bit? I mean, he said things to me that stopped my breathing. It's just like, God, couldn't you spoon-fed me that little piece of information over a couple of months? You have to just hit me with it all of a sudden? But in the midst of it smarts a little bit, but in the midst of that, I know he loves me. And I know that he's like me. See, it'd be hard to take that from an authority figure, but I can take it from a guy who cares about me and I know suffers the same way I suffer. Because it's not a guy looking down on me. It's a guy who's suffering from a similar problem coming right across the table. And I can hear him. I can hear him. So we start to go through this interviewing process, and all to get us to a point that it talks about on page 92. If we did more of this, if people had to come through this to come to Alcoholics Anonymous, I think our recovery rate very well could be back to what Bill wrote about in 1955 when we were a 75% recovery rate. But now we don't interview people. Anybody can come to AA. I've gone to meetings. I've gone to open discussion meetings where the person chairing the meeting is not even sure they're an alcoholic. They don't have a sponsor. They're sober about 2 months, and they think their name is, does anyone want to share? And they've taken the chair, they're chairing the meeting and talking. And they don't have they have no knowledge of their own, they're not properly armed with information about themselves. They're in the midst of their own narcissism and sickness, and they want to share it with everybody. And nobody gets help from that. And everybody I've ever known, if you've been in Alcoholics Anonymous a number of years, you have been to the meetings that by the time the meeting's over, you feel like you really, really need a meeting. I mean, it's just like, oh my God. Or you ever heard someone share for 30 minutes of problem with no solution? You just want to shoot yourself. I know how to make your problem go away. I'll kill myself. Then I won't have to listen to it anymore. I mean, it's tedious. It's just hard. And one of the reasons that we interview these people is to get to this point. It says where you're satisfied that they're a real alcoholic. Once you're satisfied that this guy, you've talked to him about the phenomenon of craving. Yes, he might have other problems. Yes, he might have did a lot of drugs. Yeah, he could probably gambled a bit too. Sure. We don't care. We don't even care. We don't care if you choked little baby chickens' necks. We don't care. Do you have alcoholism? You do what Silkworth said to Bill Wilson. You start to talk to him about the phenomenon of craving. The thing that Silky says differentiates us and sets us apart as a distinct entity. That's what Wilson did with Bob. Bob could have easily been confused that maybe his problem was really drugs because Dr. Bob did a lot more drugs than he ever drank. Read his story. He did barbiturates every day of his life for 17 years. Only drank periodically. But when Bill started talking about alcoholism, the light went on and Bob went, oh, that happens to me when I drink. That's me. I got alcohol. Oh, that's me. And I've done that with people who they think, well, I don't know if I'm really an alcoholic. My problem might be drugs. I'm not sure. And you start talking about the phenomenon of craving and what happens to you when you take 2 drinks alcohol and you feel the effect. Because that's so important. Because the truth is, singleness of purpose is what keeps us AA safe for us. Without it, if we start allowing people to come into Alcoholics Anonymous that do not have alcoholism, that do not have a physical allergy to alcohol, that when they drink it, they get a phenomenon of craving, then what we could create within 30 years is a fellowship where maybe a third of us could and often would drink a little bit once in a while, but they don't go too far. They only have a drink or two once in a while. I'll tell you, if you're a real alcoholic and that one drink it ruins you, that makes AA a very unsafe place. I was in a meeting down in Tucson. See, this would have been 5 years ago. I was doing a workshop down there, and a woman came up to me before the meeting and showed me her 30-year chip. She had just gotten it, and I was going to get one at the end of that month. And I said, that's very cool. She was there with 3 or 4 these newcomers she's sponsoring. That at the break, she came up to me and she said, I was giving a talk on this doctor's opinion. And she come up to me after the break. She says, I don't have what you're talking about. I said, well, what do you mean? She said that allergic reaction to alcohol, when you drink, you can't stop. I don't have that. I said to her, well, you may not recognize it. I mean, a lot of us are in the grip of the phenomenon of craving. We drink and we get drunk and we think it's our idea and we don't see the cause and effect. We don't realize that the alcohol is changing our thinking as it creates the craving. We think it's our idea to have another drink. Maybe it's been so long, it's been 30 years, you just can't look back and see it. And she says something startling to me. She says, well, she looks around. She says, actually, every once in a while I have 1 or 2 drinks. And she must have seen the look on my face. And then she goes, but I don't get drunk. It's just 1, maybe 2. I don't get drunk. And I looked at her, I said, are you kidding? No. She says, I said, you never react with the phenomenon. No, I don't even like the effect. I like the little tiny effect, and then that's enough. And I talked to her, and she never was an alcoholic. Her husband was. He came to AA, and he asked her to go to a few Al-Anon meetings. She went to an Al-Anon meeting. She didn't like it. She was more attracted to the people in AA. Well, of course, they're her drug of choice. I mean, I'm sure if you're an Al-Anon, what looks more fun, an AA meeting or an Al-Anon meeting? Oh, I want to go in there. I mean, I understand that. I mean, and she never was an alcoholic. I've seen, there was a guy came to my home group, stayed sober 5 years, sponsored 4 guys. And over 5 years sober, went back to drinking successfully. He's been drinking for 5 or 6 years now. He's 1 or 2. And that he's good then. And he might take an hour to sip 1 drink too. On his wedding years ago, there was a whole bunch of A guys there. They gave him his boss, or not, the guy who owns the casino, he's the vice president for, gave him a bottle of Dom Perignon. Him and his bride drank not even half of it, left the rest of it go flat. Right? He's not an alcoholic. Now, he probably should not try cocaine again because he had a little bit of a problem with that. But cocaine, smoking crack cocaine or doing heroin, anybody can develop a problem if you do enough of it. But alcoholism doesn't come in bottles and bags, it comes in people. Do you have this sickness? And the litmus test, Silkworth says, is the phenomenon of craving. So we interview these guys, and if you're satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, this is the real deal. And then it spends the rest of page 92 telling you basically, you got to tell the guy the truth. It says, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady. Pretty tough. You feel like you're dying and you're screwed, don't you? Well, you are. You are. You can't beat this thing. How many times have you tried? How many times have you sworn to yourself and meant it and said you're never going to drink again, and you go back to it? How many times have you failed? How hopeless do you got to get? How hopeless are you? There's never been a case of an alcoholic that's ever beat this thing in themselves. We relapse ourselves to death, and we don't die pretty. We die in anguish and loneliness and shame and self-loathing. Dwell on the hopeless condition of the malady. Show him from your own experience how the queer mental conditions surrounding the first drink prevents normal functioning of the will. Isn't it alcoholism so insidious because it uses your own mind against you? How many of us, one day, we're never going to drink, and the next day it seems like a good idea. It's like a key turns in our head and we can't stop it. We can't stop it. We always go back. It's like an itch that you're bound to scratch eventually. It just wears on you day in. This yearning for relief will wear on you day in and day out and week in and week out until you just, I have gone on my way to a liquor store to buy a bottle, crying, knowing that why am I doing this? This is the worst thing I could do. What's wrong with me? And I can't stop myself from starting. Hopeless. It goes down at the end of that paragraph, it says, there may be little chance he can recover by himself. And then a little further down it says, explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. You may talk to him about the hopelessness of alcoholism because you are ready to offer him a solution. See, for someone to tell me the truth about my condition, if you didn't have a way for me to change and become lit up and happy in a state of abstinence, the knowledge of that would probably drive me to take my own life. But you tell me the truth, and you tell me the truth because the truth. It's like it's like we're a piece of tough meat. We have to be tenderized before we're put on the grill. And that's what, the truth is what tenderizes us and makes us more ready to receive what we're going to have to receive and do what we're going to have to do. I mean, when you think about it, there was a guy just died about a year and a half ago, Dr. Gill. Dr. Gill was 60 years sober when he died. He worked with a lot of alcoholics up in the Bay Area, and Dr. Gill used to say that there were 3 stages of alcoholism. There was the fun stage, then there was the fun and problem stage, and then there's the problem stage. Who gets sober in the fun stage? I mean, matter of fact, if I get a guy and he's in the fun stage, I might say to him, are you sure you want to get sober now? I mean, wouldn't it be a travesty to get sober and find out you had 3 good fun years left? I mean, that'd be kind of horrid, I think. Why would you get sober? Because you think it's a good idea? Wow. And I think a lot of us don't get sober in the fun and problem stage because alkalogic is a funny thing. You can have like 20 minutes of fun and go to jail for 6 months. In alkalogic, it seems like, well, that's almost worth it, you know? I mean, it's crazy. I mean, and hope, you know, it talks about us being an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. Hope dies hard in us. And, you know, in normal living, being a positive thinker is an asset. I'll tell you something. When it comes to alcoholism, it's deadly. Because if you're a positive thinker and you always try to grab hope, then even in the middle of your despair, you'll talk yourself out of the reality of your condition. You'll think, oh, I'm going to get back on my feet again. I'm gonna. The problem is lack of power is your dilemma. The I'm gonnas are like blowing up a balloon and letting it go. It'll go like hell for a while and I run out of gas. So the book says, tell them the truth. Tell them you're screwed. People don't do this much anymore. I've been to meetings. I bet you I've been to 50 to 100 meetings where there'll be one of those open discussion meetings. They'll say, does anybody have anything they want to start off? And some guy will raise his hand. They'll say, I just feel horrible. I've let everybody in AA down. I had another relapse and I drank last night and I just feel so inadequate and I feel like I don't have what it takes to stay sober and I feel hopeless and this is horrible and I wish I was dead and there'll be a feeding frenzy of hands wanting to share at the guy about how wrong he is. Oh, you're not hopeless. Just you just don't drink no matter what. They're telling him all this stuff. Oh, you got what it takes to not drink. We all do. Look, just do it. Pull yourself up by your boot. No, the book says don't do that. His mother and father have been doing that. His friends do that. They're killing him with that crap. Tell him the truth. You feel like you don't have what it takes to stay sober? You don't. You don't. Feel like you're going to die? Unless you buy this whole package, you probably are going to die. You feel like you don't have what it takes. You feel inadequate. You feel hopeless. Right again. It's a home run. Tell them the truth. And we can tell them the truth because we can offer you something. We can offer you something that's worked for 4 million people that felt exactly like you felt. We can offer you a way out of this trap that seems hopeless. If you'll just do what we did. And it's even with the knowledge of the hopelessness of the condition, alcoholics still choose not to do it because of our selfishness. Because we're so selfish and so self-consumed that we don't want to do anything we don't feel like doing. We don't want to do anything that's inconvenient. We don't want to do anything that's difficult. Oh, I don't want to make those amends. I need the money more than they do. What if I go to jail? And what about me? And work with others. And I got to write all that stuff. I don't like writing. And a lot of alcoholics that are faced with the hopelessness of their condition will choose, and they never say consciously themselves, I'm just not doing AA, but they choose that by their inaction. Your inaction is your vote, really, isn't it? You may never, you could, and that's it. And here's how we delude ourselves. We'll say things to ourselves. Oh yeah, I'm willing to go to any lengths. And then ask them to do something specifically right at the moment. Well, ask me again tomorrow. I mean, see, willingness without action is fantasy. And so the reason we do all this is so that we can get to page 94, where you outline the program of action, explaining how you made a self-appraisal. So we're going to start talking to him about steps 4, how you straightened out the past, steps 8 and 9. Why you're endeavoring to be helpful to him. And then I love this. And sometimes I forget to do this, and the book stresses that this is very, very important. It is important for him to realize that your attempt to pass this on to him plays a vital part in your own recovery. Actually, he may be helping you more than you're helping him. Make it plain he is under no obligation to you, that you only hope that he will try to help other alcoholics when he escapes his own difficulties. Suggest how important it is that he place the welfare of other people ahead of his own. There were guys in AA that would do that for me. Is they'd pick me up at the halfway house and they'd give me cigarettes and they'd take me to a lunch meeting and buy me a cheeseburger and then take me back. And there were guys in AA that gave me clothes because I had no clothes to wear. I was off the streets, and gave me rides. And they gave me their time and their attention. And these were men with wives and kids and businesses to run. And they would give me a couple hours out of their life. And I was amazed that they would do that for me. And I remember telling this one guy who bought me lunch and gave me cigarettes, I said, I'm going to get a job and pay you back. And he stopped me. He said, no. He said, we don't do that here. All we hope is that you're flush enough someday that you'll have a driver's license and you'll have a car and you'll have a couple bucks in your pocket and you can do the same thing for somebody else. See, in Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't pay it back, we pay it forward. And we have to. There's an old saying, you can't keep it unless you give it away. I don't even think you get it till you give it away. I'll take two people, I'll take at random, pick a person that does a lot of 12-step work and sponsors a lot of people, and then pick someone that's just sort of pretty much does their own life and just spends all their time and energy on themselves. And then look at the spirit of both those people. The difference is phenomenal. The one person who's dedicated his life to helping others, their spirit is alive and lit up. It's almost like it has a light. And the person whose life is all about them is they may materially have a lot of things they want, but there is a dullness about them because their life is all about them. And there's a dullness. I don't want to be that guy. That's like, to me, you may stay sober the rest of your life like that, but why would you want that? When I was drinking, I wouldn't drink near beer or 3.2. I wanted 151. I want something to take me downtown now. I want lit up. Why wouldn't I want lit up in Alcoholics Anonymous? I mean, why would I half measure? I never half measure drinking. Why would I half measure the substitute, the thing that's going to light me up? Because that's really what AA is about. It's about reproducing an awakening and an effect in our spirit, in our very chi, in our very who we are, lighting me up, the way alcohol did at one time. So, on page 96, after you've gone through the interviewing process, you've ascertained he's an alcoholic, and you've explained the program of recovery to them, and they're ready to go through with it. It says, do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. Search out another alcoholic and try again. You are sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you offer. We find it a waste of time to keep chasing someone who cannot or will not work with you. If you leave such a person alone, he may soon become convinced that he cannot recover by himself. To spend too much time on any one situation is to deny some other alcoholic an opportunity to live. So if you got a guy and he's starting to dig his heels in about the steps, or he's starting next, love you like a rainbow, but I'm looking for somebody else now. If you ever decide that you'd like to do some of this and you want to buy the whole package, we're here. We'd love to help you. We'd go out of our way to help you. And the burden of recovery is always in the new person. The burden of sponsorship it's like the Hindus say that the burden of the lesson is always on the student. It's never on the teacher. And it's really, all the control is in the sponsee, is in the new guy. Because you can't, it's one of the oddest diseases. You can hit them with the truth. You can convince them of the hopeless condition of mind and body. You can do the whole deal. And yet still you can't make the person do the program. And matter of fact, don't even try. You do more harm than good. It's like, love you, next. And don't waste time. And then it says in the middle of page 96, now this is remarkable, I think. Now, you've just spent possibly the day before, or the day before that, you've spent maybe 2 hours with a guy or so, doing all the interviewing process, outlining the program of recovery. And then it says, suppose you're now making your second visit to the man. So this guy's maybe sober 2 days. 3 maybe. And then it says, you've given him a book, you've given him the big book. And then it says, and he's read this volume. Wow. Now that, if a guy's actually read the volume, that shows a high level of, I got guys I sponsor that are a year sober and I can't get them to finish the doctor's opinion. I mean, right? So, second visit, day 2, he's read this volume and he says he is prepared to go through the 12 steps. Wow. No wonder we had such a high success rate. If you're only dealing with people like that, oh my God. Right? And that was kind of the attitude back then. We really don't want you diluting what we have here. It's fine. We love you. If you're an alcoholic, if you don't want to believe you're an alcoholic, we love you. Good. That's cool. And if you don't want to do AA, that's fine. But don't come here and mess this up for us. Because I don't think they ever imagined when in their enthusiasm to open the doors wider in AA, that there'd come a time when the actual fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous may contain over 50% of the people that aren't even sure if they're alcoholic and they're not working the steps. I don't think they ever imagined it could get, and there are groups like that. I could take you to groups in Las Vegas and some of the clubs where the truth is, if there's 40 people in the room, there might be 7 or 8 that have bought the whole package, if that. I don't think in the early days they ever imagined AA would go that way. Page 898. It is not the matter of giving that is in question, but when and how to give that often makes the difference between failure and success. And I think with time and practice and failure comes wisdom. I've gotten a lot better at a lot of this, but just because I've done so much of it. My sponsor is amazing. Of course, for 55 years he sponsored people, and I don't know, he must have 300 or 400 people. He's probably sponsors 250 people sober over 30 years that he sponsored a long time. I mean, the guy's amazing. I don't know how many people ask me all the time, how many people do you sponsor? I get some little wise ass remarks. I say, about half, or I'll tell them, evidently not enough because I'm still self-centered. The truth is, I don't know how many people I sponsor, and I don't want to know. I don't want to count them because there's only one thing in me that would want to know the number, and that'd be my ego, so I could play AA show and tell. I don't know how many people I sponsor, but no matter how active I am in AA, I've never once had a feeling like I'm doing enough. Not once. And I do probably more than 95% of the fellowship. And I don't feel like I'm doing enough. Wilson was like that. Wilson had a conversation one time with Father Ed Dowling, and he was telling, this was after he got through the depressions and everything, and Wilson was starting to do pretty well. And he said to Ed, he said, even after all of this, he says, still feel like it ain't enough. Like I haven't done enough. I haven't gotten close enough to God. I haven't helped enough. And Ed said to him, he said, Bill, that's what some of us in the clergy think is God's greatest blessing. We call it divine dissatisfaction. It's the thing that, it's a blessing because the yearning will drive you to be more than what you are. And I'm glad, it's funny, I had so much therapy that was all stressed on talking yourself into being just perfect the way you are, and downplaying all my feelings of inadequacies, and you're not inadequate, you're not. And I got to tell you something, my sense of not enoughness and my yearning for more and my feelings of inadequacy very well are God's greatest blessings to me. What would happen to me if I could settle into being enough? I would stop doing everything I do here. I would lose my motivation. It's my emptiness and vacancies that bring me to the table in Alcoholics Anonymous, that bring me to the table with God, with you, with 12-step work, with inventory, with making amends. I'm driven by it. And it's an amazing thing. And my life is remarkable as a result of it. I know of people who are able to delude themselves into a false sense of okayness here. And then they stop doing it. They stop helping others. They stop being sponsorable. And their spirit just starts to just get gray. And a lot, there was a time in Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about this on page 25, where it said that we have but two alternatives, only two. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we can, or to accept spiritual help. I think our society has put us in a position there's more than two now. I see guys 20 years sober that have stopped doing 12-step work, stopped being sponsorable. Their spirit starts to get sick. They get depressed. They find a third alternative. There's 100 doctors out there. All you have to do is go in on a bad spiritual hair day and tell them how you feel. They're going to give you something. They'll give me something. They'll give all of us something. There's so many different, there's alternatives now. I think we're better off when there was only two choices because you just did that and you got better. We don't always have to do that today, unfortunately. It says, the minute we put our work on a service plane, the alcoholic commences to rely upon our assistance rather than upon God. He clamors for this and that, claiming that he cannot master alcohol until his materials needs are cared for. Nonsense. Some of us have taken very hard knocks to learn this truth, that job or no job, wife or no wife, we simply do not stop drinking so long as we place dependence upon other people ahead of dependence upon God. And that is a tricky situation, and I've gotten a lot better at it over the years. When I was, for a long time in AA, I would try to fix people's problems. A guy would have police problems. So I'd go to some judge I knew in AA and get the problem solved. And then the guy would drink again because the problem is what brought him here, right? I'd get guys who's clamoring about, I don't have any money, I really need a good job. I'd go to some guy who owned a company or a store or something in Las Vegas, and I'd talk my friend in AA to give this guy a job, and then after the guy gets one or two paychecks, he gets drunk and he robs the guy, And who gets help here? There's an old adage, you give a guy a fish, he'll eat for a day. You teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And every newcomer, without exception, comes to AA clamoring for a fish. And the good old timers are they're ignoring them, trying to give them fishing lessons. And if the new people are better off taking the lessons. But self-centeredness and selfishness is so driven within us that we clamor for help, relief, and we clamor for this stuff. And, you know, Bill at the very beginning of the book says something. He says, a price must be paid. It means the destruction of self-centeredness. Now that's an odd thing to say for a person who can never be entirely rid of self. But I can start taking the actions of someone who's free from the bondage of self, even though I'm very preoccupied with self. And that's where good sponsorship has helped me a lot over the years, is that my sponsor encourages me to act better than I feel. Matter of fact, he doesn't even care how I feel, pretty much. He just cares what I do. He cares, do I look like a servant? Do I look like a person who's serving God and serving others and serving the primary purpose? Or do I look like a person who's serving himself? And when I start to do things that are self-serving, boy, he jumps me. He can be very harsh at times. And he always wants me it's like God's vision of Bob and my sponsor's vision of Bob are better than Bob's vision of Bob. Right? I've been very lucky. I've made a lot of mistakes in early sobriety. God, if you ever come to Las Vegas, I got a home group that we got a bunch of young guys that are on fire with AA right now. And we're doing it right out of the book with them, you know. They're sponsoring guys, and we're pushing them into 12-step work right away. And we're pushing them into the steps right away. It's not unusual in my group, if you're sponsorable and you have a good sponsor, one of the old timers in my home group, that you might be 60 days sober and you're halfway through your amends. And you're sponsoring one or two guys. And these guys are on fire. There's a thing that happens. I get guys that come to me that are sober 25 years and they're depressed. And they're stood at the turning point. They're either something's going to change, or they're going to get on medication, or they're going to drink, or they're going to be suicidal. You get to those turning points, man, where there's nowhere to go. Something has to become different. And sometimes these guys will reach out and they'll take one desperate shot at Alcoholics Anonymous before they could do something that everything inside them tells them intuitively, I probably shouldn't do that. And one of the first things I do, we go back through the steps and we try to plug the leaks and what amends haven't you made that you think you got away with, etc. And then one of the first questions I'll ask them, how many people do you sponsor? It's startling that someone 20 years will say, well, I got two guys, but they don't talk to me anymore, and they're both sober over 10 years. So you haven't had the experience of taking a new person through the steps in over 10 years? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. And I just start pushing them into it. I'll start pushing them. And they'll fight. They fight it. The ego fights this stuff, doesn't it? Isn't it? Does your ego ever create resistance when it comes to self-gratification? Mine never does. But when it comes to spiritual growth, oh my God. They'll come up with endless excuses, endless justifications, endless rationalizations why I got more important things to do. Oh, it's so self-serving the way it talks to me in my head. And I just keep pushing them. And they're resistant. It doesn't, I'm not good at that. It's not, just keep trying, keep pitching. And then you see 4 years later, all of a sudden they got about 7 or 8 guys. And one of the reasons that I push guys in to start working with newcomers right away, if even just, I tell them, I say, listen, you go to meetings where there's a lot of new people. You go up to one of them You introduce yourself. You give them your phone number. You say, do you have a sponsor? And if they say yes, you say, that's really great. You know, that's such an important thing here. I hope you have a great relationship with him. If you ever can't get a hold of him and you need to talk to someone, feel free to call me. And if they say no, they don't have a sponsor, you say to them, it would be my privilege to work with you if you so desire to be sponsored. I'm not pushing myself on you, but I would be honored to help you in any way I could. And you'll be surprised that a certain percentage of people that you say that to, it'll light them up because they have been battling within themselves for a long time to get a sponsor, and they're too afraid to ask someone, and you just took it away from them. And they'll just jump right on it. And if you persist, remarkable things happen. There's a great promise in the book that says that God will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. And he'll do it in serving, in service of others. He'll do it in 12-step work. As a matter of fact, isn't that the gist of all the 12 steps? We get to step 3 and we make the third step decision and we say that third step prayer. It's all so that God will take away these difficulties with self for one reason, so that victory over them would bear witness to those I would help. I come back in step 7 and I say to God, please take away the things that stand in the way of my usefulness. And then later on it starts talking about our real purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And we're to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And there's this new default position that goes through the book. We do this, and then we turned our thoughts to someone we can help. As if, because the old default position is, well, I did that, and now I'm going to think about me. Did that, now I'm going to think about me. So we're trying to create a new default position of other-centeredness. And it's all in action. The action is in the turn. When you stop and you're full of yourself and you think, God, what can I do to help somebody? Where can I go? Wonder if they'd let me into detox today to talk to somebody. Wonder if I went down to the club, I could find some new person there that's having a tough time. Maybe I could spend an hour with them. Maybe I could go buy some guy lunch that doesn't have any money after a meeting, and we could talk AA for a little bit. I ask God my morning meditation every day to use me. What can I do? The book says we ask what we can do for the man who's still sick to become more useful. And one of the great things about pushing your sponsees to sponsor people is that if you sponsor 10 people and none of them are working with others, you'll want to hang yourself because they're narcissistic. You'll have 10 phone calls a day about what they're doing to me and how I feel and this. Once they start sponsoring people, now they're calling going, oh my God, you won't believe what this idiot said to me today. And all of a sudden, they're like a joy to sponsor, because they're less full of themselves. People who are full of themselves, as I was tedious to be around. I remember when I was new, there were a couple people that were at the Thai club. The minute they'd see me coming, they'd just go, because I was so wrapped up in me and so problematic. You asked me, Bob, how you doing? 20 minutes later, you're going to regret you asked me the question. Because I'm just so self-obsessed. And when your sponsees start sponsoring people, when I started sponsoring people, all of a sudden I started to get free. And people that aren't full of themselves can be a joy to be around. And now you're part of a fellowship in action, and you're all on the same page, and it's not about you anymore. It's about them. It's when your sponsees claim their primary purpose, and it's no longer them, it's a beautiful thing. Now you and your sponsees are really in the same fellowship. You're in the fellowship of the Spirit. You're on the same page. Now your lives exist, coincide to help others. And that's every Thursday night, there's a bunch of us, not every Thursday night, but about 2-3 Thursdays a month. I'll go out to eat with about 8 or 10 guys I sponsor to this restaurant, this diner, and we just talk. We're talking about how helpfulness. We're talking about the people we work with. We're talking about the H&I meetings. We're talking about trying to get a new meeting in some new facility. That's what we talk about. And there's not one person at that table whining about anything. And there's some people that have some of them have a lot of problems, all kinds of stuff. But they're free because they know that the solution is independent of the problem. The solution is helping others. Bill called it the primary purpose, number one. Number one. It seems like so much to ask of a self-obsessed, self-focused, self-absorbed, self-concerned, self-obsessed person to make helping others a greater purpose in their life than helping themselves. My grand sponsor was a guy named Chuck Chamberlain, and Chuck used to say, "It's not my business to worry about me. That's God's business. It's my business to simply forget about myself and help his kids." And when you're new and you're problematic and your life's falling down around you, it's hard to get your mind around that. But I got to tell you, 35 years later, I think Chuck was absolutely 100% on the money. Just to the extent that I forget myself and I help others, my life gets good and stays good and things are good, because my problems that are often, if not always imagined, will seem to die of neglect. Because maybe they didn't exist to begin with. Maybe it was an hallucination of an ego that has to find problems for it to feel significant and play God. Maybe there never was problems in my life at all anyway. Let's take a 12-minute break, and we'll come back and we'll do some question and answer and maybe a couple more things. This is for the seventh tradition, so Joe can pay the rent here, whatever that is. One other thing I'd be remiss if I didn't mention: if you want to become a really good sponsor, develop a working knowledge in a personal application of the 12 traditions. I think it may be one of the most important things that I can do in working with someone. I don't just sponsor someone with the 12 steps. I also sponsor them into service and in unity in the Fellowship Alcoholics Anonymous. We have 3 legacies, and you could do an incredible job of the 12 steps and still drink again. You could do a credible job of being an active member of a home group with 20 commitments and still drink again. You could do an incredible job of 12-step work and get depressed and just the wheels will fall off your life. Because Alcoholics Anonymous has 3 legacies, and it's like a 3-legged stool. If you have all 3 in place, there's stability. If you only have 2 of the 3 legacies, it's a balancing act trying to stay up. So I not only encourage the guys I sponsor to take the steps, but also to become active in a home group, to have commitments. Commitments are so important. You know what a commitment is? It's something you do even when your favorite TV show's on and you do it anyway. Even when your wife puts on that negligee and you still walk out the door and you do your commitment, right? Commitments are non-negotiable. And they tether us to Alcoholics Anonymous, and really, by our actions and fulfilling the commitments, allow us to feel like we're really connected here and a part of. And then also in service. Have job. I have jobs in my home group. I got a commitment Monday. I got 2 commitments Monday. I got 3 commitments on Tuesday. And I have a committed meeting on Wednesday and on one Thursday. Thursday it's about half the time. So I got jobs in Alcoholics Anonymous, and